right, everybody. Welcome to this little video lecture. Obviously, we're starting our World War I unit. You should be copying this into your guided notes. Just kind of a little helper for your assignment, kind of help you along. So, obviously, World War One. I kind of mentioned this with imperialism on how you're starting to see the ingredients for war. There's competition for resources and prestige around the world. You're competing for colonies and power, and ultimately, when you're competing for those things, when money's in the line and spreading your influence in markets and competing for resources, that's going to lead to some rivalry and some hatred towards other countries. That will eventually lead to war. So we'll talk more about that when we get into causes. So obviously, World War One, time period wise, 1914 and 1918 is the how long the war is going to last, 4-year war. Now, spoiler alert: America is not going to be involved in the war the entire time. We're going to be neutral at the start, and we'll get to more of that next week. But again, this war really was the first time where you have countries from North America, you have countries from Europe, you have countries from Asia, you have countries from you have parts in Africa. This is again a worldly event. Countries from all over the world, different continents are all represented. So obviously, as we talked about with the Gilded Age, mass production of goods, also technology. Yes, technology in terms of consumer things like the telephone and all those things, but also in terms of weaponry. So this war is going to be absolutely brutal because of the new weapons that are going to be created. So that's why they call it the Great War. And hopefully, and the idea, the war to end all wars. Hopefully, the idea was that you would never need to have this kind of war again. So World War One in a nutshell. This is the first war to include multiple countries. First war to include, as I said, countries from Europe, Middle East, Asia, kind of all drawn together. This is the first modern war that we had, again, with technology, airplanes, things of that nature, machine guns. First gas attacks, as we'll get into as well. This is the first European war the U.S. fought in, and this was the largest mobilization effort to date. Again, when you're talking about sending millions of troops from North America into Europe, you need to mobilize that. That's a huge process. So what are our goals? Our goals for the unit is, to understand, what sacrifices that millions of Americans made. Now, yes, soldiers, absolutely. What sacrifices did they make? But also citizens and also government and also industry back at home. There were things that Americans were asked to do at home to help out in the war efforts. We'll get into that. What were the causes of the war? What's the impact of World War I on the future? Technology, World War II, how wars are fought, women and minority groups, and ultimately, what lessons can we learn from this war? So they're all things over the next couple of weeks that we're going to be focusing on. All right, we'll do this tomorrow. So hold on to this thought. But I wanted to kind of show you guys this as part of your slides. Like, look at the amount of troops. Germany, they have 11 million troops that they deployed in World War One. Russia, 12 million. Great Britain, almost 9 million. USA, 4.3 million. France, 8.4 million. So you're talking about, again, we'll get more into the Allied powers here in a minute, but 42 million U.S. 42 million Allied troops that were part of the alliance system. 42 million troops were involved on the Allied side, and you got about 20, we'll say 23 million, we'll round up a little bit, for Central Powers. Now look at the amount of people that were killed. Now again, this is only including troops. This is not including civilians, guys. So again, this war was fought in cities, in population areas. So you're talking about just in soldiers alone, you're talking about over 8.4 million soldiers killed. It's not including 20 million that were wounded, some severely. This also is not including a couple things. It's not including civilians that were killed, which was tens of millions, and also didn't include like the casualties of the Spanish flu, the epidemic, of the pandemic that was in 1918, as we'll get into in this unit as well. All right, so ultimately, what I had you guys do is looking at the causes of World War One. What led to the buildup of the war. So there's a term I want you guys to remember, is something called MANIA, M-A-N-I-A. This is an acronym that will help you remember the causes. And this should be reviewed from last year from Global. But the M in MANIA stands for militarism. So due to imperialism and rising tensions, all major countries started building up the military. So think about the United States. We wanted to be a world power. We wanted to gain colonies across the world. We started building up our military, the Navy, Army, Marines. So there's a big, massive arms race to collect as many weapons as you possibly can. Let's glorify military power. To again, the more land you have, the more prestige you have. Keep a large active army. So again, you don't want to. So there's a big difference. You have peacetime army and you have wartime army. And usually in peacetime army, you keep the military rather small. So the idea is, okay, well in this one, let's keep our militaries big regardless of peacetime or wartime. And we always need to be ready for war. So this kind of shows it all. In 1910, this is, again, before the war even took place, 10% of the budget, I'm sorry, France increased their budget just for military by 10%. So they knew that things were kind of in the works. So they began to expand their military. Britain, same thing. They increased their defense by 13%. Russia, they expanded to almost 40% of an increase in their military budget. And look at Germany, man. Almost 75% they increased their budget and their defense for their country between these years, again, before World War I even started. So that shows like the buildup. 2, causes of the war. Again, A in mania is alliances. Alliance is a friendship between countries that promise to defend each other. So again, this is well before the war broke out. Started even in some cases starting in the 1800s. Countries began to kind of reach out to each other to make alliance systems set up. So there were 2 main alliances. You have the Triple Entente, which I'm going to call it the Allied powers to make things easier. So I'd make a little note of that in your notes. So again, Triple Entente, think of Allied powers. Okay? That's Great Britain, France, and Russia. And guess what? America is going to join that later on, well into the war. So you can even include America if you want to make your life a little bit easier. Over here on the other side, they call it the Triple Alliance, but I'm going to call it the Central Powers. Again, to make things a little bit easier for you. So I'd make a little note of that. So again, Triple Alliance, call it the Central Powers. That makes life a little bit easier. Again, that's Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So keep Italy in mind. We'll kind of come back to them in a little bit. But those are the 2 main alliance systems. Now, there were many other countries that were in the alliance, but those were like the main powers that were really involved. So here's a kind of a map to kind of show you guys, so think of it as like a sandwich. You have, in Europe, here's on the left, so I think you guys can see my cursor. The left side of the screen, Britain and France, that's like the outside of the bun. Russia, outside part of the bun. That's the Allied powers, also known as the Triple Entente. And then in the middle is like the meat. It's like the central, hence the Central Powers, also known as the Triple Alliance. Germany, Italy, Austria-Hungary. So the Central Powers is kind of in a rough spot. They're kind of like they have to fight 2 fronts over here, and they fight over here. They're surrounded essentially. So again, keep that in mind. But those are the alliance systems. Again, Triple Alliance, think of Central Powers. Triple Entente, you think of Allied powers. All right, the N in mania is nationalism. So we're talking about this with imperialism as well, about how countries were looking to spread their belief systems, their religion, their language, their customs. They felt like their country was better than anybody else. So think of like nationalism. Think of it as like it's patriotism on steroids. It's in a very intense feeling that your country is better than anybody else. Now we see this during the Olympics or the World Cup. You see this all the time. Like this kid right here is like intense. So anyway, now there's 2 kinds of nationalisms. You have your rivalry between powers, hence that's imperialism, and you have smaller groups that want freedom. Again, keep that in mind. I'm going to scroll back really quick to here. Right here in Serbia, you see right where my cursor is located at. You have different ethnic groups, and for a while, Serbia is controlled by Austria-Hungary. This is all part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And you have people within Serbia that want their independence from Austria-Hungary. They don't want to be controlled. So also that's kind of what that's saying, is that you have small groups that want freedom. They want to separate from the larger empires and have their own independence. Like think of like the Philippines, same thing. They want a small country wanting to separate from Spain, wanting to separate from the United States. Cuba, same thing. So ultimately, nationalism is going to lead to competition and rivalries that are going to start to develop, as we'll get to here in a little bit. So again, as I said, nationalism in Europe was divided into small nationalistic states. each seeking to assert power over one another. So again, I'm going to skip this because we kind of already talked about that, about Serbia, how they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They want independence, and they're going to fight for that. They want to separate from the larger empires. Again, you just kind of see this. Here's Europe, kind of before and after. Here's Europe back then. And then there's Europe today. See, Poland's created, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia are going to be created after the war. Ukraine is going to be, so Ukraine did not exist. So you see that the map's going to change after the war. All right, the I in mania is going to be imperialism. Again, we already kind of, spoiler alert, we already talked about that. All major countries around the world want to start or expand their empires. So this is going to cause conflict. This is going to cause rivalries. Why? Because the Industrial Revolution, you have countries that are competing for resources. England, United States, they need coal. They need supplies to fuel their factories. They want raw materials, whatever, sugar, gold, whatever. So you take them. So for instance, let's use Africa. You go into Africa. This is your colony. You take gold. Okay, you take their gold mines. You take their gold. You extract it from them. You send it back to America. You put it into the U.S. factories. You make something out of the gold, and then you sell it to all over the world. So you're taking their resource, and you're getting rich. That's all part of the Industrial Revolution, keeping Americans working, keeping American business getting rich, and then ultimately also needing markets, new markets to sell to. So if you imperialize, you're going to, very similar to what Great Britain did to us. They made us buy British sugar, British tea, exact same concept. Well, we're going to do to other people. So again, we already talked about that, so we're gonna move on. And then again, last year in global, this should look familiar to you guys. The carving up of Africa and how European powers were, going into Africa and taking a piece because of the resources, diamonds, gold, you name it. America, we just went into that last unit. We talked about that as well. All right, and then finally, the A in mania, the other A, is assassination. So June 28th, 1914, Prince Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, and his wife Sophie, she's pregnant at the time, and typically she's not allowed on these trips. They go to Bosnia. Oh, we just talked about that with Serbia, all in here. So long story short, Prince Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, and his wife was also killed. She was shot right in the stomach. Obviously, she was pregnant. Very unfortunate. But the person who killed them was Serbian nationalists. So against nationalism, you had Serbians that wanted their independence from Austria-Hungary. Prince Franz Ferdinand was the Prince of Austria-Hungary. They controlled Serbia, Bosnia. Serbians wanted their independence. They wanted to separate from the large empire. Why? Because Austrian-Hungarians weren't Serbian. They didn't respect Serbian culture and Serbian traditions. Again, we talked about that with imperialism, about the motives behind that. So there was a Serbian nationalist group that was fighting for their independence, essentially, and they thought by killing the prince that you kind of cut off the heir to the throne, and eventually that would start a Serbian movement to gain independence. So this Serbian nationalist group is called the Black Hand Group. Secret military terrorist group, you can call them. Basically, that's what they were. They used extreme measures to fight for Serbian independence. So here's a kind of a picture. You kind of see this Austro-Hungarian Empire. So here's the empire all right here, and you kind of see, the different ethnic groups that are in there. You have your Hungarians, you have your Bosnians. Bosnia. This is where this is located at. Sarajevo. This is the city where it happened at, the assassination. So this whole blob here is Austro-Hungarian Empire that's controlled by these different groups. Okay, and then finally, kind of wrapping things up. Ultimately, glory. Back then, they believed that war was glory, and they were ready for war. They were itching to go. There were parades, guys. There were parades for going to war, which is ridiculous. But they were ready. They wanted prestige. They wanted to put their names on the map. They wanted to expand. Now, this kind of shows you guys like the dislike, what imperialism caused. France hated Germany. Germany hated Great Britain. Great Britain and Germany had a rivalry. They didn't like each other. Russia felt like they were the guardians of the Slavic people. That they were protectors of the Bosnians and Serbians. And again, the U.S. was neutral.